Can you turn an atheist around? Should you turn an atheist around? And why are the religious so adamant that everyone has to be just like them? These are all fair questions, but I don't think you're going to get intelligent answers if you ask the faithful. Why? Because they're terrified. So let's set the record straight today as we tune in on a podcast. Let's get going. This time out, we're going to take a look at a short segment on a podcast I'm assuming called Tower of Torres, but I'm not quite sure. Anyway, he's got a pastor on, a Mike Montgomery, and they're going to talk about what to do with a child who has fallen away from the faith. Now, there are a lot of ways you could go about this, some reasonably positive and a lot not, but let's see which way they choose, because that says an awful lot about your theology, doesn't it? And along the way, I'm going to shed some light on why the religious are actually terrified of atheists. I hope it helps.
So Tammy Wood asked this question. You sort of answered it a little bit, but I'm just wondering if there's more that you could say about this. My daughter claims to be an atheist. I'm not sure how to turn her around.
What makes you think you can? What makes you think you should? And I always love how the religious put it. She claims to be an atheist. Well, how do you know it's just a claim? How do you know that's not what she is? Yeah, I know, terrible questions for irrational people. But as I've said before, the religious are absolutely terrified of atheism, mostly because the very existence of people who don't follow their imaginary friend makes them realize that people don't actually have to believe. They don't burst into flames immediately when they deny the Holy Spirit. And that's scary stuff for the religious. It's why the religious want to make everyone just like them. That way, they don't have to deal with their fears. It's one thing for people to follow other religions. I mean, that just makes the other believers wrong from their perspective. But for people not to have any religion, for people not to believe in any gods, that's horrific. But let's get back and see what their answer is. I'm sure it's going to be a hoot.
Love her. Like, seriously, love her. Speak truth.
The love thing is fine, so long as it isn't cult behavior love bombing. But speaking truth, yeah, while I absolutely agree with that sentiment, the religious tend to have a huge problem actually demonstrating that what they believe is in any way objectively true. They might believe it's true, they might have faith that it's true, but as for it being demonstrably true, that's another matter entirely. It's why I keep saying, I don't care what you believe. I care what you can prove. The religious are just really, really bad at actually providing any evidence that the things in their heads actually comport accurately to the objective reality that we all inhabit. Yeah, absolutely. Love your family if they deserve it, but maybe this is a good opportunity for the theist in the picture, this Tammy Wood, whoever she is, to actually figure out if her daughter is actually right. Because I think she probably is.
And this is another thing, especially if it's your daughter. If it's your daughter, or if it's your son, or if it's a family member, as much as like you want them to come to faith, you have to recognize that this faith is their own faith. It can't be your faith.
You know, that's actually some pretty good advice. Good job. But going back to what I already said, the desire to turn the world Christian or Muslim or whatever, that's a desire born of fear by the religious. They want everyone to be just like they are. They might tell themselves stories that they're trying to save souls or whatever they make up in their heads, but it's always about the believer and never about the convert. they're really not that concerned for your soul. It's just a rationalization that they get from the Bible. If everyone believes the same thing, they don't have to worry that maybe, just maybe, they're wrong. Maybe this tower of cards that they've built to live in, it might just come tumbling down around their ears if anybody doubts it. And that's a scary thought, and deep down, I think a lot of theists are really concerned that it's all as much nonsense as it looks from the outside. And that's why they fight so hard to preserve it.
If it's your faith, what's going to happen? They're living under false pretense. Like they're not in a relationship because they want to be. You have to, as a parent, your job biblically is to love your kids, raise them up in a godly home, but at the end of the day, it's their choice.
And apparently, the daughter has made it. So where does this claims to be crap come from? She chose. Leave her alone, at least unless she's doing something demonstrably harmful to herself or to others. And yes, I'm sure the mother thinks her daughter's actions harm her faith, at least subconsciously, but that's not really harm. That's reality knocking at the door, demanding to be let in. And I figure most theists would get offended if we said that about them. Well, Bill claims to be a Christian. Muhammad claims to be a Muslim. Winifred claims to be a Scientologist, but, we know how nutty she's always been. So why does it change when it comes to atheism? Because the religious, Christians in particular I've noticed, have bullshitted themselves into believing that we're all just like they are. It's why they spend so much time throwing that passage from Romans 1 around, like it means anything. No, it just means that they're desperately trying to rationalize their faith. It also means they're idiots. But anyway, let's continue.
I tell my parents this all the time in youth ministry. You are not a failure because your kids don't believe in God. You've done what you can. You've planted the seed. You've taken them to church. You've loved them. You've shown them God's love. It's up to them to make that choice.
What about God? Because that's something else that we see a lot, especially in apologetic circles. You can't actually convert anyone. That's God's job. It's just an excuse they make to keep from feeling bad when they inevitably fail. It's why children of fundamentalist and evangelical Christians are far more likely to abandon the faith than those of moderate and liberal Christians. It's because those people are crazy and they drive their children away. Now, I have no idea what's happening in this particular case, and it's really not my place to speculate, but it seems pretty safe to ask where God is in all of this. If it's so important to believe, why does God permit people to fall away? I mean, shouldn't we all believe if that's what God wants? Why are we being given a choice, especially given the fact that God is going to roast you for all eternity if you make the wrong choice? Oh yeah, that's right. God is a dick. I forgot.
And you just have to realize that it's difficult though. And if your daughter's watching, which maybe she is, maybe she isn't, your mom obviously loves you and cares for you, and you obviously care for your daughter. And I would encourage you, instead of saying, how do I turn her around? Ask yourself, how do I love her more?
I actually kind of like this guy. He makes me think he's not one of those fire and brimstone idiots that we see on the extreme fundamentalist side, which is always a good thing. But it also makes me wonder why people like that believe in the first place. Why be so reasonable right up until you get to your religion, at which point you throw all of that reasonableness right out the window and just become a crazy person? Now, people do have an ability to compartmentalize, but I always wondered how you could be so blind not to recognize what you're doing. It's been way too long since I've been in the fold to remember how that felt in any detail, so if anyone here is a more recent deconvertee, please let me know in the comments how it feels, because it's a weird question to think, well, my brain works this way in this circumstance and completely opposite in this other circumstance. I don't get that anymore. My brain just works. I wish theirs would try.
You know, how do I love her as Christ loves her? To be able to turn to her and, like, remember, we talked about this in the last podcast, to die, to lay down my life for her, even if she doesn't accept. To be there for her even if she doesn't love me back. You know, that's what it is.
That's unconditional love.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautifully said, man. I love it. I love it.
It's not unconditional by definition if you're trying to change the other person. Unconditional love requires that you accept the other person as they are, not as who you wish they were. And I see that a lot, especially in videos like this, where one person, usually a parent or a guardian or something like that, is trying really hard to force their kids to do what they want them to do. Of course, there's always the excuse, well, I'm trying to save your soul. But I don't know that I buy that. Not really. I think it's all fear. Not fear of some consequences for the kid after death, but fear right now for the believer who, having to face the fact that someone close to them doesn't buy into their religious bullshit, that maybe they shouldn't either. Without uniform conformity, there are questions about the validity of all sides. And religion, it doesn't deal with that very well, does it? This is better advice than I would have thought. Remember that I don't pre-screen these videos before I respond to them, but it still demonstrates a lot of the fear that pervades the religious mind. My advice would have been something similar. Don't stop caring about them, don't stop loving them, and do yourself a favor, and as much as you want to preach, and let's be honest, preaching is kind of part of the religious mindset whether they want to believe it or not, maybe she should just listen to her daughter as well. Have a conversation. Ask why she doesn't believe in God. Maybe she's got some good reasons. And I say this from personal experience because my mother asked me the same thing once, and immediately thereafter, she never went to church again in her life. And that was about 30 years ago, if you can believe it. At least not outside of funerals and things like that. And I think that's the part that scares the religious the most. The possibility that having an intelligent, rational, adult conversation with a non-believer will expose the fallacies in their own faith. And they can't have that. Reality is just too scary. And whether they like it or not, the belief that they have in the stupid things that they believe, it's really, really dumb.
Boom, 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 boom.